what is the greatest problem in Western civilization? It's a good thing that we notice Western here, because Western civilization, I guess, is still under the long-term influence of Judeo-Christian beliefs and the cultural taboos around those beliefs. Alan Watts mentioned churches once in the 60s. He said churches are pretty much sexual regulation centers. And we're still suffering from that regulation. There's certain things we feel we ought to feel guilty about or anxious about or feel bad about. And a lot of it's just total rubbish, really. We have all these taboos, like things we just shouldn't talk about because, well, our parents probably had difficulty talking about that, and our grandparents certainly never even maybe thought about that. Who knows? We have certain thoughts and ideas that we feel guilty about even thinking. And this is all a result of the compounding genetic belief system around these religions, taboos, political taboos, nationalistic taboos. The works, it's all out there. So the greatest problem in Western civilization. Well, firstly, I'll say disconnection. Disconnection from each other and disconnection from self. But the most intensive way this is happening is something that we can call the global male vulnerability deficit. That sounds a bit complicated. Male vulnerability, what does that even mean? I grew up in a culture where male vulnerability didn't really exist. We were taught to believe that as a young kid, as a boy, as a man, to express your emotions, to express weakness or vulnerability was weak, and certainly was unattractive to women. So there was no grounds from which to experience and to express weakness, express emotional confusion, express that we might be having a lot of difficulty with anything that's happening in our lives. We were, via watching the elders around us and schooling, we are taught that this is very uncool and unattractive. And also the cultural programming that goes with this is young women are taught that men who are emotional or spiritual, let's say, and showing these sorts of vulnerabilities are not attractive. There is a deep kind of genetic imprinting that women are attracted to stoic men. This whole kind of caveman kind of mentality is like, if you're in a crisis and a saber-toothed tiger is attacking the cave and you've got the kids in the cave, your non-vulnerable stoic man is going to go deal with the situation. There is no time or space to become vulnerable or emotional. You just deal with it, right? And then come back and then deal with whatever else needs to be dealt with. So there is a inbuilt nature in the feminine to be attracted to men who can just deal with extreme situations. However, in the modern Western world, these sorts of extreme life or death situations are a lot more rare, and it's given us the opportunity as men to start to evolve spiritually. And by going through this, we're going into full disclosure in ourselves of our past, of our trauma, genetically, past lives, childhood, to really go into full awareness of this, and to be able to express this and to share it, to share these weaknesses, to share maybe our lack of insight or our lack of hopefulness or our lack of strength, and to feel supported and nourished in our relationships or in our family or in our friendships, to be vulnerable and be supported by people who are spiritually aware enough to know that this is a beautiful thing. So many men feel they will be rejected by their female partner if he becomes vulnerable or if he becomes weak in any way. So this vulnerability deficit on a global scale is very, very serious, because the more men are not vulnerable, the more they're closing down the free-flowing energy in their body, and particularly their heart. So I don't want to say most men, but we could be dealing with something like that in the Western world. Let's say most men are completely disconnected from themselves. And when you're completely disconnected from your heart and there's no free-flowing energy, there's trapped energy. You're not sensitive to yourself and how you feel because you've been told to shut down all the time. don't feel, it's not attractive. That's what they've been told. So the more you look at the programming and you shed the programming, it's about having the ability to witness the programming through your timeline and to let it go. And to realize that we live in a spiritually modern world where these changes need to take place or the planet is doomed. Here's a good example of the difference between the masculine and feminine when it comes to vulnerability and feeling the planet. When you're feeling into your heart, you're feeling the earth. So this is why women, more often than men, will be feeling the earth, feeling Gaia consciousness and becoming very stressed by it, perhaps because of what the earth is going through. In the redwoods in California, there is a grove of trees called the Rockefeller Grove. And I was lucky enough to sleep the night there once, a few years ago. And I read a plaque. This is actually the area where they filmed the Ewok scenes in Star Wars. And in the morning I read a plaque and it said that this grove had been saved by this group of women. I didn't really understand the history of that area, so they were just cutting all the trees down. And most of the men lived in that area were loggers and they worked in sawmills and they were cutting the trees down. There was no vulnerability. They didn't really feel the finite reality of the forest around them, and they would just chop the trees down. It was money, industry, business. So the entire hierarchy of control, masculine hierarchy of control around the logging, none of them really cared. It was just a job, or they were just trees. They didn't acknowledge the spirit of these trees or the age or the complete, beautiful and special nature of this forest and some of the biggest trees in the world at the time. And a bunch of loggers and sawmill men, their wives, got together, and there was a beautiful grove of trees which is still there, the Rockefeller Grove, and they petitioned the government and petitioned bankers, the Rockefellers, to put money aside to purchase the grove off the logging company and not cut it down. So these women were enough in their own vulnerability, enough in their own hearts to feel the trees, to feel the fact that this place was special, needed to be looked after, and made the changes and made the physical moves to stop this group of men who were not feeling the reality of the preciousness of the situation. And they saved the grove because they got money from the Rockefellers. So in present day, so much of the negative things that are happening to the world are from masculine leadership. We live in this patriarchal society where men have set it up to call the shots. And a lot of the calls they're making, especially around warfare and mining and logging and all this sort of thing, there's very little thought about how this affects the planet, how this affects nature and the environment. There is some thought, but they're not feeling into the deep reality of the ramifications of this long term at all. So this global male vulnerability deficit in ourselves affects the way we make decisions around other people and around the planet. And this is very harmful. Like if we were going to start to become sensitive beings and go through our own emotions and go through our own vulnerabilities as men, we would start to notice and feel the way we are interacting with others, the way we're interacting with nature, and the way we're interacting with the planet. And this would change politics, and this would change environmentalism, and change the way we make energy and everything on the planet. So this disconnection has been trained into us and needs to end. And this is something that everyone needs to approach on an individual level, both men and women. What can I do as an individual? You need to ask yourself this, to reduce the suffering on the planet. When you're making decisions on your day-to-day life, what would a person who loved themselves do in this situation? How can I reduce suffering here? So it's about supporting each other in our emotional vulnerability so we can all become more sensitive and more aware and more tuned into our own extrasensory perception, to our own spirits and to our bodies around making these decisions.